will they process justice, because I think so much inspiration has come out, especially with the last session. So what I try to do is, I know that the documentation, they will give us the details, but this is some suggestions on framing and maybe how we can connect what we have discussed, more specifically with the last two sessions for this afternoon on looking at conflict trends, conflict issues, and with the last one, I was like photo finish, trying to catch up. Anyway, so I start with the more depressing part, and end with the highlight, which is this last session. For the conflict trends, maybe just trying to think of ways how we have identified issues around the political, economic, social, and cultural expressions of violence around this realms of our society and communities, and also countries. The second point is to think of not only the current trends, current expressions of violence and conflict, but look at the historical implications and how the current is actually very much connected with history. And so that actually challenges us to be critical and to go deep, because a lot of the issues that we see today have historical ramification or historical causes. So I think more homework on how we can do that connection. Many of the conflict trends were really very overt, seen, felt, heard, visible, and so it's in our face. We encounter it day by day, but there are also a lot of issues that are hidden and structural. And so again, the challenge of how are we able to actually uncover and again do more analysis of the structural and hidden issues, especially the hidden powers that we don't see, but are actually have very much in control of our local situations. The fourth aspect is the connection with a lot of our local issues and how it's connected with global issues. So very interesting of how the group that work on the global trends had very much connections with how conflicts are happening in our different localities. And so how as a network, how do we begin to actually make that connection so that when I do my local effort, there's a difference that is being made at the higher level. And how do we strengthen that connection? But more importantly, how do we bring that global analysis to the communities where we work? So conflict is happening at different levels, from the individual to group to neighborhoods, so communities, nations, and state. So again, the challenge of the different layers that we have to work at. What I try to do is also distill some of the concerns and conflict dynamics that I have heard, and we can probably as a group maybe later add to this. So number one is the hard power, this presence, this overarching presence of hard power that is being felt in our different communities. And so the increasing powers of the military industry that actually has influences or shapes local issues, especially with armed violence or armed conflicts. The second aspect is government. How do we look at government in terms of relationship with people, with regards to the issue of security versus human rights, security of state versus community security, community safety, all those dynamics that come into play when we talk about role of government in peace and security. the increasing trend of government being controlled by economic interests and corporations. How do we look at that? And also how government is actually engaging communities in possession, very weak response in terms of how to, addressing needs, basic needs of peoples and communities. The third aspect is, of course, the power of the corporations in the economic realm. And we are talking about not just economic inequality, but really economic models that are not working anymore for many of our communities. So the challenge of that in terms of looking at solutions. The shrinking civic space, so looking at the balance of the state, civil society, private sector, and how that actually plays out in terms of the conflict dynamics in our society. The people component, we talk about the culture of indifference, culture of silence, fear, mistrust, the horizontal tensions, tensions vertically. So all this minority, majority, superior, inferiority issues. So all about the relational dynamics. And then lastly, media. So looking at these different concerns. So the main issues identified, so we had a number of interstate regional issues, maybe a point of reflection for us as Asia Pacific of how do we actually address the nuclear issue, potential nuclear war, Japan versus North Korea, India, Pakistan, India, China, South China Sea, West Philippine Sea issue. So how are we engaging in that aspect, again, which affects our communities while it's at that interstate level. In terms of the key concerns, what I try to do is maybe just consolidate the different expressions of conflict and violence in the different regions. So militarization is, I think, in almost all the reports, armed conflicts that are happening, economic inequality, rich versus poor, economic exploitation. Again, this critique of economic models now in our societies. Most of the identity-based relational issues, so we have different expressions across different countries. Racism, xenophobia, etc., fundamentalism, terrorism, so different expressions that actually fundamentally is about differences in identity and in relationships. Gender-based violence, and political systems that perpetuate discrimination of peoples, marginalized peoples, the persecution of human rights defenders and CSOs. Again, the historical aspect, how do we deal with the remnants of colonization in the way that conflicts are being played out in our communities. Destruction of natural resources. And then lastly, I haven't, there's not much expression about cultural violence. I did hear a lot about it, but the caste system was talked about, but I didn't hear a lot about it, but maybe later we can think more of like what are cultural violent expressions in our different societies. So, those are some of the points, and then again, maybe later we can deepen that more as we move along. So now, to the vision of peace. I will not repeat what you said because it's so beautifully worded, beautifully phrased. But maybe just some points of suggestions that the way that we look at peace is a process. So I think most of the way that we visualize, shape it, it's really about process. It's about increasing capacities. It's about education. Peace is also building infrastructures, platforms to actually facilitate sustainable peace across. And maybe later, if we can do a good documentation that really capture the indicators of peace that came out from the first group. And I think from the different groups, there were many inspiring descriptions of what we hope for. And so we will look at that later. Sustainable peace. Peace should be present from the local, national, regional, and global levels. It's about absence of war, all things that are negative, all things about ending violence, ending what should not be. So, peace building and conflict transformation is stopping the violence. And I think one of the aspects that we also try to do is also about alternatives. Establishing, mainstreaming the alternative. So it's stopping, but also offering something, offering the alternative. So it's this, the non-violence metaphor. Setting up mainstreaming of the alternative system. A lot of our descriptions were about human flourishing. Very beautiful descriptions about human flourishing, happiness, hope for all, living in harmony, etc. Sustainable economy, good governance. It's about subsidiarity, use of non-violence and dialogue, integral ecology. So to end, it's really about, I think, the permeation of peace and non-violence in the global systems and global culture. So that's what I got from the different consolidation of the group. So, thank you very much.